Hey everyone, welcome back. Today's explainer cuts straight to the core of an incredibly efficient little organism, the Spirogyra. We're going to dive right into the source material to explore its structure, its daily life processes, and how it perfectly scales from just a single microscopic cell up to literally driving entire aquatic ecosystems.
Okay, so let's dive into this. Spirogyra is a filamentous green alga, and it belongs to the Chlorophyta group. If you've ever been out walking and noticed those long, stringy green strands swaying in a freshwater pond or a slow-moving stream, you've almost certainly seen it. But its real claim to fame, and actually where it gets its name, are its highly unique, spiral-shaped internal structures.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll meet the Spirogyra, check out the anatomy of its spiral, look at its daily survival functions, how it makes asexual clones, the sexual conjugation process, and finally, why Spirogyra actually matters.
All right, moving to Section 2, Anatomy of a Spiral.
Now, what's really interesting about this image is just the sheer elegance of the organism's design. You're looking at these long, unbranched filaments. They're essentially cylindrical cells joined end to end, kind of like train cars. They're protected by an outer cellulose wall and a mucilaginous sheath. But the real standout here is that vibrant, ribbon-like green spiral. That is the chloroplast. And if you look closely, housing the central nucleus right in the middle are these delicate little strands of cytoplasm.
Let's methodically break down what these structures actually do. The cell wall, that acts as its outer armor. The spiral chloroplasts handle all the photosynthesis. But did you notice the pyrenoids embedded within them? Think of those as tiny little starch pantries just for storage. The nucleus, as always, is the command center. Meanwhile, that massive vacuole acts as a crucial pressure regulator for the cell. And finally, the cytoplasm serves as the bustling factory floor where all the metabolic activities go down.
Section 3. Functions and Daily Survival.
So, what does this thing actively do all day to survive? Well, there are 5 key life processes at play here. First, it's autotrophic, meaning it uses those amazing spiral chloroplasts to manufacture its own food through photosynthesis. Second, it uses oxygen for respiration to get energy. For growth, the cells simply divide and elongate the filament. Excretion happens seamlessly via diffusion right through the cell surface. And finally, movement. Now, it lacks true locomotion. It can't swim, but it's a highly efficient, self-sustaining factory that simply drifts wherever the water currents take it.
Next up, asexual clones via fragmentation.
Imagine the environment is perfect. Plenty of sunlight, plenty of nutrients. When conditions are this favorable, a single long filament literally just breaks apart. You can see how it splits into distinct fragments here. And because absolutely every single cell has everything it needs to survive, each broken piece just begins dividing and elongating on its own. They rapidly grow into brand new genetically identical filaments. It's cloning made incredibly easy.
But what happens when conditions aren't perfect? That brings us to the sexual conjugation process. When conditions get tough, Spirogyra shifts to a totally different strategy, a fascinating microscopic ballet known as conjugation. It happens in 5 exact steps. First, 2 separate filaments align perfectly side by side. Second, tiny cellular bridges called conjugation tubes start to form between the opposing cells. Third, the entire internal contents of one cell squeeze right through that tube into the other. Fourth,
Their nuclei fuse together to form a zygote. And finally, that zygote develops a really thick protective wall, transforming into what's called a zygospore. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what that bridge-building process looks like under a microscope. Starting on the left, you can clearly see the two filaments aligned, with those conjugation tubes starting to push outward to connect. Then, in the middle, you see the actual cell contents, labeled here as the male gamete, literally transferring through that connecting tube into the female cell. And finally, over on the right, the transfer is complete. One cell is left completely empty, while the other now holds a brand new thick-walled zygospore. That dense wall is essentially microscopic armor plating, and it's absolutely crucial because it allows the organism to survive harsh, unfavorable environments. So, how does this all tie together? Well, it's basically one continuous loop, as mapped out in this life cycle diagram. Starting on the right, you have your normal vegetative cells living in their haploid phase. If times are good, they can just loop tightly at the top through asexual reproduction. But if we follow the red arrows downward, they can engage in sexual reproduction, that scalariform conjugation we just talked about. They form that hardy armored zygospore at the bottom during the diploid phase. That zygospore just lies dormant, waiting out the bad weather, so to speak. And when the environment finally becomes favorable again, the zygospore undergoes meiosis, germinates, and grows right back into a new vegetative filament to start the entire cycle all over again.
Which brings us to our final section: why Spirogyra matters. Let's zoom back out from the microscopic view for a second. Why should we care about this? Well, the ecological impact of this little organism is actually massive. Because those spiral chloroplasts are constantly running photosynthesis, Spirogyra is a vital underwater oxygen factory. Plus, these massive mats of filaments form the absolute foundation of aquatic food chains, keeping countless insects and fish alive. And beyond the pond, its unique structure and rapid reproduction make it an incredibly useful model organism. It helps scientists all over the world understand basic cellular processes. So I'll leave you with this thought. The next time you walk past a quiet pond and spot a tangle of green floating on the surface, will you just brush it off as ordinary pond scum, or will you see it for what it truly is? A beautifully complex microscopic factory quietly powering our entire ecosystem. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep staying curious, and I'll catch you on the next one.